Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Outlander is the show from Starz Entertainment, all about Claire Fraser, a 1940s nurse thrown back in time and now married to a semi-outlaw called Jamie Fraser, back in 18th century Scotland. Episode 14, The Search, begins with Claire and Jenny frantically getting things ready to go back chasing out after poor captured Jamie. Ian wants to come as well, but conveniently, his missing leg and injuries mean that he can't come, or stop the girls from rushing off by themselves. So, Claire and Jenny, who's only just squeezed out a babby, jump on a horse and ride off into the countryside. There, they find the dead watchman and eventually find the redcoats. And Macquarie's still there in chains, but there's no sign of Jamie. They see a courier riding off, so they manage to get ahead of him and set up a clever ambush to capture him. And then, it's time for a bit of torture, as Jenny cooks his feet with a red-hot ramrod. It's only when this doesn't end up working that Claire actually thinks of looking for the letters in his back, which, really ought to have been the plan all along with him being a courier and everything. Anyway, they find a letter that says that Jamie escaped, and now that they've managed to nick that means nobody would know about it for ages. And that just leaves the redcoat. And while Jenny and Claire are having an argument about whether or not they should kill him, Murtaugh pops up, and he gets him dead for them instead, so they don't have to worry about it. Kinda lucky. And now that he's there, it's time for Jenny to go home to her new babby, while Claire and Murtaugh go off finding Jamie, in the most elaborate way possible. First they try asking around while she does a wee bit of healing and palm reading, and he does a bit of a crappy sword dance. And then when that doesn't work, Claire tries out her hand at dancing and singing, in the hope that news of a singing Sassenach might filter down to Jamie and let him find them. And this has its own problems when a bunch of gypsies start ripping off their song and dance, so Claire gives them a load of money and makes them promise to stop doing the song, as she knows it might confuse Jamie from finding her if there's two people doing the same thing. And Murtaugh of course thinks this is kinda daft. And after they've sung and danced their way all the way to the coast, they take refuge in a cave and have a bit of an argument, during which Murt shows his softer side by talking about how he used to fancy Jamie's mum, and he'd give her some nice bow-tusk bracelets, which Claire now has, and somehow when she pulls them out, that makes everything okay between them. In fact, it looks almost for a moment like they're gonna... No, they don't, and that didn't happen. It just looked like that might have been going to happen. Anyway, the next day they start out dancing and singing again, but earlier on they go to a pub, and they meet the same bunch of gypsies, the ones who admit that they've actually still been singing that song all along, but it all is not lost because it turns out that they've heard from Jamie, and he's going to meet them. Hooray! So the pair speed to the rendezvous, but instead of Jamie, they find Dougal. Wait, what? It turns out that Jamie's been caught after running into a squad of redcoats on the road trying to get to Claire and Murtaugh, and Dougal doesn't want to risk Claire being in trouble, so nobly he offers to marry her to protect Lallybroch and her safety from Blackjack. Only Claire knows better and realises that this is Dougal just protecting his Jacobite interests, and also him making a land grab for Lallybroch. So she turns the tables on him and says she will marry him, but only if she can lead a rescue mission to save Jamie, and that fails. And Dougal says okay, but he won't force anyone to go, so Claire has to go and round up the usual folks and meets Willie, Rupert and Angus, and together the five of them go off to the prison. So what did I think? Well, The Search is a curious episode of Outlander, and unlike most episodes which might cover a few days, it feels more like this takes place over the course of a couple of months. It's kind of a long, protracted affair, and it feels like it's got a share of comedy, drama, and even some daring do. And in a funny way, this feels a bit like a bridging story like The Empire Strikes Back from Star Wars, or maybe the third Hunger Games movie. It's got that open at both ends feel, but with a singular self-contained plot in the middle. And it's nice to see another few sides to the world of 18th century Scotland, with the gypsies and dancing and revelry, and a little less of that hookter-choochter lairdly word of Leoch and Lallybroch with kilts and sort of daft castle stuff going on. And I think Katrina's work as Claire was really good in this episode, balancing the fun of the dancing and singing, but also keeping the gravitas of looking for Jamie, and the way that she carries herself through all these scenes. And it was really nice to see Dougal again, and the lads for Lallybroch as well. But this is Grumpy Opinions, and I've always got my thoughts to give. First of all, while the structure and pacing of The Search was interesting, as I said, it has a kind of Empire Strikes Back feeling to it, the brass tacks is that for a huge stretch of this episode, I was actually kind of bored. Bored out of my mind bored, and either that or cringing with total embarrassment. See, the episode is less of a search and more of a wee look followed by a funny and then kind of boring plan and a side plot about some gypsies and dancing and singing that really doesn't go anywhere interesting. Then it comes to a far more interesting ending that could have been happily taking up far more of the story. I mean, put it this way, how much better would the episode have been if the whole Gypsy side plot had been cut out, and they'd met with Dougal near the halfway mark, and then there'd be maybe a lot more of him and Claire facing off about each other, and then maybe spending a decent amount of time trying to find and convince the others and, really get them to help her, maybe have to do something to get them on their side, and showing her resourcefulness, not just singing and dancing, but actually in convincing people to come and help her save Jamie. Another gripe I had was that they spent the whole of the start of the episode trying to create a plausible reason for only Jenny and Claire to rush off by themselves, and then 10 minutes later they pack Jenny back off home just when big strapping man Murtaugh turns up, which feels a little bit sexist and a bit of a waste of Jenny, who's been fantastic through the rest of the series. It's also a little bit icky and weird that in a show where we've been led to despise Jack Randall for torturing people, we're supposed to be cheering on Jenny while she's scoring the feet of a bloke with a red-hot poker. I mean, he's a courier. That's like a soldier postman. It's not like he did anything to them. And in the end, he didn't even break under the torture. That makes him like kind of Jack Bauer or something. But then they have that whole dafty conversation about not killing him, only for Claire to turn around a scene later and say that actually she would have killed him. Well, then why were you arguing about it, love? Jings. And then Murtaugh killing him just makes it feel like, the two girls weren't capable of doing it, or that we might have thought badly of them. Honestly, show, have a little balls sometimes. You've got the balls. Next week you're going to have all the balls, so why didn't you have some this week? And finally, despite all of the supposed shock of Claire promising to marry Dougal, it did seem like kind of an empty promise. I mean, let's face it, she can go back to the Stones at any time, and if Jamie's ends up hurt or killed, she can go home to Frank, can't she? I mean, she would, wouldn't she? You would, I would. Anyway, till next week, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.